to be suggesting that free speech and exercising the muscle of argumentation and debate and rhetoric might be a good way of avoiding violence in society. And certainly our ancestors in this country, the founding generation established a system of government that very much relies on persuasion of our fellow citizens as a way of overcoming disagreements, not coercion. So we should try to continue that. And I always think of Oliver Cromwell's statement that when men run out of words, they pick up swords. So that's one way of seeing speech. But of course, we now have an idea among some folks that speech itself can be an act of violence against someone. And I think we should take it seriously, because if you have someone whose entire identity is wrapped up into a claim that someone else thinks may be baseless, and you attack that argument or that supposition, it can be taken as an existential threat to that person's identity. So how do you guide the person on each side of that conversation?
Well, there is an oddity, isn't there, in our day, which is the two things happening at once. The idea that words can be violence, and the idea that violence cannot be violence, or at least on occasions is not violence. Now, let me take the first one. The words of violence one is such a category error, it's hard to know where to start. It is true that words can wound. I mean, it's one of the delights of them. Kafka says somewhere in a letter to a friend, we should only read books that stab at us. We should only read things that wake us up to such an extent. He wouldn't have got past some censors. But we know that words can wound, and sometimes wound very, very deeply. But to say that they ever approach the same level as physical violence is to tread only into one direction, which is a direction of saying, ergo, we must treat words, if they are badly spoken, with the same seriousness that we treat, say, you punching me right now. And if we do that, we would have to agree societally on what those words were. And I'm not sure that any society could agree on that. Because what wounds one person will not wound another. There are some things that people can say to me which would wound me not at all. Other things that might. Could I legislate on the basis of that? Absolutely not. Would I want to? Absolutely not. One of the things you always learn about, as a reporter, I've traveled to lots of very unfree countries. And one of the things you discover quite swiftly in any country, like, I don't know, or North Korea is the one that I've been to, which comes most obviously to mind, a kind of extreme example. But what you realize is that in a country where you're allegedly protected by speech laws, you can't say anything. You're simply not free in any meaningful way. A society in which even your deepest feelings can be trodden upon is absolutely the only society worth living in. All other options are totalitarian to some degree or other, and have to be resisted, in my view.
So we've here. So if I could ask you before you make your statement or ask your question, if you could just identify yourself, please.
We'll get back to Douglas Murray and his answer to that first question in his speech at the University of North Carolina. But I just wanted to say that, isn't it funny, folks? Isn't it amazing that the people that talk about free speech, diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, are able to do so in the freest country in the history of the world, at least up to this point? Some would argue maybe we're not that free right now because of these certain things that they're talking about, like silence is violence, speech is violence, words can cause physical harm, words can traumatize you physically, they can hurt you as much as being physically assaulted. That's what they're trying to say. But they're saying it because they're allowed to say it here. Try doing that, as Douglas Murray said, in North Korea. And they call it the Republic of North Korea. Really? What are they, stupid? The Republic? It's not a republic. It's a freaking dictatorship. The dictatorship of North Korea. Try doing that in some Middle East countries. Try doing that in China. Try doing that even in some Western democracies. Try doing that in Great Britain, folks. There are hate speech laws that have now crept into the public domain, and people are being visited by SWAT teams, by the Metropolitan Police in Great Britain and others in European countries for basically just saying that, hey, you know what? Oh, you're pretty short. That person's tall. You're an idiot. Next thing you know is knock, 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 knock. Police are at your door, SWAT team. Oh, what happened? What happened? Did you, on August 4th of 2023, at 11:01 p.m., tell your neighbor that he was fat? You did? We have proof. You put it down on Twitter. You had it on Facebook. You called your neighbor fat. Bring the cuffs. You're going to jail. You're going to be ordered into court and have your trial date because you said a bad word. You naughty person, you. That's what's happening, folks. That's what's going on right now. But these people are able, and I mean leftists, liberals, progressives, those socialist Marxists, they can talk and say everything that they want because they're allowed to do it, the freest country. And they tell other people that they're the ones that are being fascist. They're the ones that are being the racists. They're the ones that are being Marxist. They're the ones that are doing, Hitler-like things. They're the ones that are clamping down on free speech. When it is not the people that are on the right, when it's not conservatives that do that, it is the left that continues to do that, folks. Anyways, we're going to get back to Douglas Murray in the Q&A session at UNC. You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political prescription from my political perspective of what happens when you put Douglas Murray, get him to talk in a room about all things in free speech, social justice, politics, government, policies. Speech is violence. Is it really? Let's get back to the Q&A session with Douglas Murray right now.
I've been listening to your book, and it's a wonder to me that recent developments in our thought, which are ironically born out of our Western mindset, are themselves self-loathing of the West, which is like we've created our own destructive potential. Are there cultures that have done that, have created their own demise, and were they able to avoid it?
Well, it's a very good question. You probably know the famous Toynbee quote that civilizations don't die, they commit suicide. It's a pretty, it's hard to think of a case of a civilization that's died where that hasn't been the case. I think, one of the interesting aspects of what you say is the issue of what I would have as being where self-criticism goes wrong. I regard self-criticism as being an incredibly important thing in a society. Like, you do not want to be living in a society that is not self-critical.
So true.
Any more than you would want to live with somebody who is not self-critical. The question for society as with an individual is, where does self-criticism become a kind of self-harm or a self-laceration or even a self-destruction? I think actually it's not that hard to identify. And my best attempt to identify it is this. Everyone in this room at some point has been given advice. I hope you all have. But you've been given advice in your life by a variety of people, I would assume. We can all tell, we develop in order to tell pretty easily the difference between somebody who is giving us advice who wishes us well and somebody giving us advice who wishes us ill. So if my mother said to me, Douglas, I think you've done this wrong, or you shouldn't have worn that, or I don't know. But I'd listen, at least. I might not agree, but I would listen because I would know that she wished me well. If a stranger came over to me in the street and said, I hate your face, your voice, you can't write, you can't speak, your clothes are awful, and there's this thing I think you should do, I wouldn't follow that guy's advice because I knew he didn't have my best interests at heart. Now, I submit it's the same with societies. I think that if somebody says, now look, this is an amazing country, has a huge amount going for it, a huge amount of opportunity, it had a remarkable past, but there are things that we should address in it. I would say absolutely. And there are things in the present we need to address. So there are inequalities going on at the moment. I'd say absolutely. Let's discuss them. Let's discuss the way to solve them. If somebody said,
and that's so true, folks. But the left never does that, especially those people that hate America or hate these Western democracies in which they live in. The way Douglas has framed this question, absolutely. Not just, throw everything out, that it's 100% bad, it's 1,000% bad. There's great goodness. There's 99% goodness of what the United States of America has done for the world and for itself. There's a small percentage that's bad. We can talk about that. We can agree to disagree. We can put that on the table and hash out our differences there. But to basically say, to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that's exactly what happens from the left and progressives that totally want to undermine this country completely, and Western democracies as well.
everything in this country's past is rotten. We've been rotten from the start, and we've never done any good. I don't think that person is speaking as a critic who wants to improve the society. I think they're speaking of the society as though an enemy. And I cannot understand why people would listen to such a person.
We shouldn't.
I hope that answers some of your questions.
Serendipitously enough, my name is also Elijah Parrish. I'm a sophomore studying philosophy and psychology. You gave this very nice discussion of the transition from public intellectuals to scare quotes, public intellectuals. And I want to ask if you could provide maybe a genealogy of what's changed. So perhaps some like sub questions of this would be like, who can get away with not defending your claims? You appear to need to defend your claims, whereas some people you've mentioned don't have to defend your claims. What do those people have in common? Why them in particular? What has changed, and why has it changed?
That's a very good question. It's a very tough one, because I think everyone probably present has their own sort of mental history of where things changed on this. My own view is that, I mean, people who will not contest their ideas in public, it tends to be that they know that they're not good enough to do it. Now,
They're
you
cowards.
could say sometimes that, I mean, I do know people who are, like, for instance, distinguished scholars, but aren't very dexterous on their feet on a public debate and wouldn't love to do it, but, you know, might. If any of you who study the Middle East will know distinguished Middle Eastern scholar Edward Said, and probably also know of one of his great enemies from the academy. There's a video online of Bernard Lewis and Edward Said debating in New York in the 1980s, and you can tell Lewis is hating every single moment of it. His throat is drying up, his sort of glottal problems, his eyes are bulging. Because Edward Said was a wonderful debater, and I think Christopher Hitchens was also on Edward Said's side, so it was sort of rough going. But my point is you could see the physical discomfort, but still, Bernard Lewis knew, since he had written against Said and Said had written against him, you couldn't duck doing it in public at some point, and so they do. I would say it's some time after the internet, after social media. I think the technical reason it's happened is that people are able to avoid people who do not agree with them in the same way that a user can. So people speak to an audience base.
Yes.
And if you say, you really have to be able to argue that, in public, they effectively don't need to, because they've got whatever financial system it is in place that allows them to only speak to a group of people who agree with them and who will egg them on and urge them on and encourage them and so on. But I do think that's cowardly. I think it's fundamentally cowardly, and it should be called out as such. And part of the reason it isn't, I think, is also that people are intimidated by the claims that will be made. You know, if you notice the claims of excommunication in our era, they are all the ones that are most damaging, and they're ones that most ordinary people would want to avoid having leveled at them. So they just duck. But you can get an awfully long way if you're a bully. I have to say that is one of the things you learn in life. I mean, you can get an awfully long way if you're willing, for instance, to throw out malicious claims about people. And I wish it wasn't the case. I wish more people stood up to bullies. But we do have a sort of bullying thing in the public square in America in particular, where people say things and effectively say, you want to criticize that? Be my guest and wait to hear what I call you. I don't think it's a civilized way to go about debate, but anyhow. Yeah, of course.
So
Some great questions there by these students. Really, really wonderful questions, thought-provoking. Douglas gave his usual great answers in terms of that. Just a very, very nice segment. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. We appreciate you so much taking the time to watch our show. If you liked our content, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. You all know what to do. Like, share, and follow us. Check out our other video links to more of these episodes above and below. I'll leave you with my final thought, which is, when you're right, you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.